I originally wasn't gonna shoot today because I have been losing my voice. Alas, you've heard the throat clearing, no doubt, as I've been, let's say, prodigious in my consumption of THC as of late. I believe it's part of what Carl Jung calls the individuation process, what I call universal alignment. I was just listening to Carl Jung's Red Book, fascinating. But I just wanted to post today because it's America's birthday, and I wanted to make a special video why I believe America is the greatest country in the world. Now, here's the thing: if you don't understand everything that I say, it's because the things that I say are and write about are new. The adaptive expansive philosophy is something that I created. The universal alignment is something that I created. If somebody has an idea of the universal alignment, I'm pretty sure it's not the same concept that I created. Everything that I talk about, for the most part, are my own creations, right? I learn from as many different sources, writers, philosophers as I can, and I synthesize and create my own theories. So nothing I say, I don't recycle parroted talking points. I don't. Everything I create, I say is unique. So why I say that America is the greatest country in the world? The Western civilizational model has reached its limits. The Enlightenment thinkers, and Locke, Montesquieu, the English thinkers, the French thinkers, the German thinkers, all of these great thinkers that helped to create the Enlightenment thinking and the Enlightenment revolutions that led to the French and American revolutions, that led to them crushing the Haitian revolutions. They brought us to the civilizational model that we are currently living in. However, this civilizational model has reached its limits, and there's no path forward until now. A path forward has been created with the adaptive expansive philosophy plus simulation theory. These two philosophical concepts are uniquely tailored to face the challenges of the culture war and the meta crisis. And these concepts are designed to create an evolution of the human consciousness, which is the only way for the humanity to solve the meta crisis and create a post-racial society plus win the culture war. So this was created in America, and this was my experience, right? One day I'm gonna write a book. There's an old French quote. I believe its origination is in French. Its origins are in France. If you're not a socialist at 13, you're heartless. Or if you're not a communist at 13, you're heartless. If you're not a conservative by 30, you're brainless. Okay, there's a reason why I preface that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, not my whole life story. It's somewhat harrowing, I guess. But anyway, so as a youth, my father was killed in Honduras when I was a month old by a drunk driver. My mom met an American man, William Gilbert, who's my stepdad, the only father that I've ever known, the only man in this world that I will ever love, William Gilbert. If you're watching this, I love you, Dad, I do. Even though he's my stepdad, he's the only father that I've ever known. Anyway, he's hardcore MAGA, right? He is. When I was about 9 or so, he got into a terrible accident, and we started fighting a lot more. I was somewhat of a rebellious teen. I stole a lot, and I was sent to Honduras for my senior year as punishment after being arrested twice. And so I went to my senior year in high school in Honduras, and I lived in my aunt's house, which it was the poorest house in the wealthiest neighborhood, like just with incredible wealth, right? And she had like one of the more modest homes. I don't want to say the poorest because that's not true. Like, she had one of the more modest homes, right? Compared to some of these like mansions with like 5 cars and armed guards standing outside. So like this is where I finished my senior year in high school, and I just remember riding my bike to my cousin's house and going through different, passing down the street. Some homes had 5 luxury cars with armed guards outside. And not 5 minutes later on my bike, I'm riding by dirt floors, shacks, kids running around naked to get to my cousin's house. I came back from that. I went to Loyola University in New Orleans, and I was just fascinated by learning. I wanted to learn as much as I could. I was originally very far left. I fell in very much into the Fidelista Guevarista school of Latin American leftist revolutions. But besides that, I was just pretty vigorous. I wrote a lot for the school paper. If you were to go look up my old writings at Loyola University, some of them would piss you off. And I tell you what, I would defend every word of it to this day. Although I have grown, I still, I support anything that you ever see from me that I actually wrote that isn't fake. I will back it up. There's nothing that comes out of my mouth that one day I'll be like, no, well, I didn't mean to say that. If I made a mistake, I'll admit it. But everything I write, everything I say, I'll back it up. So I was very hardcore left. I tried to change the world. I was very involved in politics at Loyola's campus. I was involved in many extracurricular activities. Again, like I said, I wrote. And I wanted to change the world, but my attempts were in vain as a young kid, a young college student. This was before the age of social media. Alas, being prone to mental health, depression, and I began experimenting with marijuana, and that's when I had my first and second manic episodes. And around that time, I started doing worse at school, and I eventually had to drop out. Even though I completed my history major and my Latin American studies minor, I didn't complete my political science major or my Africana studies minor. So I just left it at that, and I just left school. And this was around the time of Iraq, and which I was fiercely opposed to that war. And I just remember this one day I was having an acid trip with this young woman who I dated, and in the morning we went to go get some breakfast, and there was these massive protests against the Iraq war, and that was about the time that I quit. I was done at that time. I just went into the spiral of drugs and alcohol, and again that's when I said that I created the character of Armando Cienfuegos. So I was very far left at that time, and then I stopped following politics. I stopped caring about the world, quite frankly, and I was just doing hardcore drugs and living in my own brain, living in my own mind. But certain things happened. I remember I met certain people who I thought were really good people, and then when I found out they were conservative, it blew my mind. I'm like, wait a minute, you're conservative, but you're a good person. Like it went against everything that I believed. I thought that if you were conservative, that meant that you were a bad person, that you hated minorities, but that wasn't the case. And also throughout the years of my life, I looked at some people who were on my side who I thought were just bad people, and I was like, gave me the determination right there to judge people. I don't care if you're MAGA. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I care what kind of person you are. I don't think that the majority of MAGA is racist. I think the majority of MAGA are just people trying to support their families who didn't see any chance in the Democrats or any other options. Therefore, they voted for MAGA. I don't believe that most people who vote Democrat hate America, and they just want to see the end of Western civilization. I believe that they just think that MAGA is a terrible option. And I think that overall, the majority of the people in this country are good people. I don't think that the majority of Americans are racists who hate minorities or who hate whites. I think the majority of Americans are just decent people trying to survive who are all manipulated by narratives. That's what the basis of simulation theory is, right? The hyper reality of social media and the internet, it creates this hateful, toxic environment. But in the truth, in reality, I think that a majority of Americans are just good people who just want to get along with each other. God bless America. So anyway, I got back into politics in 2020. And the reason why I prefaced this whole video with that quote was because there was a shift towards the right in my life. I had noticed it. I had noticed it around the time of George Zimmerman. I didn't necessarily, I questioned what was going on, with some people at my job, and they thought I was just automatically taking Zimmerman's like I was automatically supporting him. Honestly, I didn't know. Like to this day, I still don't know the facts about Trayvon and George Zimmerman. I don't know. But around the time of 2020, I had at the time that Donald Trump was elected to office, Thanksgiving Eve of that year, I was arrested for felony DWI, and that event saved my life. I went through the specialty courts program of Jefferson Parish. So at the beginning of COVID, in February of 2020, that's when I graduated the specialty courts program. And that was a huge victory for me. That was me winning like the war on drugs right there, and that's when our Armando Cienfuegos won the war on drugs in my historical timeline of the history of the United States of Latin America. So it was a huge deal for me. Alas, COVID hits, right? So we're stuck inside. So I finally watched Game of Thrones, and I tried to hurry through it in a week because I had a week long free trial for HBO, and I loved it. I won't say how many times I've rewatched Game of Thrones, but I haven't watched it to the end only once because I can't watch the whole thing to the end anyway. So that's when I began getting back into politics in 2020. I started following a lot of conservative pundits, Tim Pool, a lot of black conservatives I began following. Me graduating drug court in 2020, finally being on the right side of the law, not having a ton of problems, paperwork, and always getting in trouble with the law. I finally got my life back on track. It was good to get in touch, and talk with my stepdad and build a better relationship with him and my mom, who are both fiercely MAGA. They're both hardcore MAGA, to the dismay of the rest of the family, right? They're like my mom is the only one in the family like that, like hardcore, and it's because of him. And because of them coming back into my life, I was much more influenced by the right. And I believed the narrative that the liberal media lied about Trump, because I could see the narrative manipulations of BLM. Why is it that every time a white person, or especially white cop, did something to a black person, that's the first thing? White cop does this to black person, or just white person does horrible thing to black person. And then when a black man ran over 5 people in Wisconsin on Christmas, red SUV kills 5. Why is it that the narrative was like that? So I began to believe, I'm like, okay, maybe the media is biased, and maybe the media is lying about Trump, right? And that's why right now I'm critical of MAGA, because MAGA is in power. But ask anyone who knew me after 2020, when I began talking about politics again, I was fiercely critical of the Democrats, and I will be again once they take power. I'll be critical of anybody who I feel is leading our country to ruin. And MAGA and the Democrats are both just as guilty of leading our country to the current state where it's at. They are. They're two opposite sides of the same coin. Okay, so alas, I did believe a lot of what was going on, a lot of what the right said about the media just lying and manipulating narratives to blend their own narrative, right? To create this picture of America where blacks are being under attack and whites were being unfairly accused of racism. Alas, to my horror, Donald Trump gets elected again, right? And even before the election, I see the narrative manipulations come back again, right? Just as the media was manipulating narratives in favor of BLM, highlighting every single time, despite the fact that there's millions of interactions with cops throughout the country, and people of all races have bad interactions, the media only chose to highlight the negative interactions of black people with cops, right? However, when the media started manipulating narratives in favor of Trump, no one even noticed it except for me. And I was like, wait, what's going on, right? Because on the one hand, you have the you have the liberal media trying to highlight everything negative a white person does to a black person and call that out to try to create this state of just chaos. Blacks are under attack, and whites are bad, right? But then when the media started doing it in the other direction and no one noticed, that caught my eye, right? Laken Riley, Jocelyn Nungary, say her name, right? How many women get raped and murdered in my beautiful country every year, right? How many women? But you only say the names of the cute white ones when they're raped and murdered by some brown or black skinned person. How does that work, right? Laken Riley, say her name. Oh, these immigrants are coming in this country and just raping and murdering all the white girls, right? That is not the case, actually. No, lots of women are raped and murdered in this country, but you only want to talk about it when it's some cute little white girl getting raped and murdered by some disgusting brown or black person. Jocelyn, well, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to really reveal too much about personal location. But anyway, just those murders were savage, and they upset me, especially Jocelyn Nungary, right? A 12-year-old girl, for what happened to her, like that. was savage. But I'm against all rapists. I hate all rapists. I was molested as a child. Child molesters and rapists, I have a prejudice against them. I hate them. I don't care if the rapist is a brown skin or black skin person that doesn't come from America. Any rapist, as far as I'm concerned, should be gelded. Right? That's just me. I don't just care. Oh, these Muslim rape gangs in the UK. I hate all rapists. So when I saw the conservative media just manipulating narratives in favor of Trump's agenda, right? This anti-immigration, create this hysteria and negative agenda. Let's blame black and brown people for the fact that white birth rates are plummeting, and there's no answer for the white nationalist right. You have no answer to solve the declining birth rate, which is why you want to blame black people and immigrants for everything, right? So anyway, that plus more narrative manipulations, right? The South African refugees, despite the fact that there's lots of crime and everybody is suffering in South Africa, you just want to let white, refugees in. Trump making claims about China having military operations in the Panama Canal, and nobody in the media checking it at all. Not one person in the media said anything about that, right? That plus a lot of other things that Trump did that he just got, that nobody in the media checked him on. And by now, in his second term, the media that criticized him has largely been silenced through lawsuits, and they've just been silenced, right? So therefore, I was able to see how the narratives are manipulated on both the left and the right, whereas nobody else did. If you're on the right, you saw how the left manipulated narratives, but you ignored it when the right did it. And if you're on the left, you see how the right manipulates narratives, but you ignore it when your side does it. Why is that? But nonetheless, this is how and why I came up with simulation theory, and this is why I think that America is the greatest country in the world. I do praise the CCP a lot because they're praiseworthy in many ways. Yeah, you're going to tell me about how many people they killed. And let's talk about how many millions of people that we've killed because of wars that we started that were based on complete lies. Okay, that's the game of geopolitics. All right, but I would have never been able to create simulation theory in China because I would have been too silenced. I wouldn't have been able to explore myself, to explore as many different narratives and the perspectives that they embody as we can here in America. Anyway, this is a bit of a longer episode, but I feel like it's really crucial. And if you watch this episode, I think you will be benefited immensely. Anyway, that's my last video for today because I need to save my voice for work. All right, bye.